Anyway, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Crimes, Killers, Cults,
And beer.
and Beer. I'm Bill, and this is my lovely co-host Sandra. I'm talking like
Hello.
Captain Kirk. But
Oh my God. Oh no. Don't do
this
the
is
whole episode like that, Bill.
I won't. This is I'm going to try to talk fast on this episode though, because it's a lot. But this is this is episode 141, and we're covering David Berg, a Sikh cult leader who led the Children of God cult. He went by several names, including Moses David, Father David, King,
Daddy.
or probably just Moses or just David, and my personal favorite, the last end time prophet. It's still active and it's now called the Family International, but it had several other names such as the Family of Love, Teens for Christ, the Family, and of course, Children of God.
Hmm.
We're mainly going to be covering it under David Berg under the name Children of God. This cult was a sex cult, a child sex cult. It used the female members to recruit new members by having sex with potential recruits. And Berg called this flirty fishing.
He wasn't wrong, I guess. uh,
Berg would never do time, but he fled the country. He fled the U.S. in 1971, and he hid out in Portugal and other places until he died in 1994 in Portugal. Although while in hiding, he still ran the cult up until the time that he died. But he only ran the cult in person, like like on location or whatever, from
mm.
1968 to 1971. The cult was founded in California, and it had satellite locations worldwide, and all of them were investigated for child abuse and prostitution. So let's dig in, shall we? David Berg was born February 18th, 1918 in Oakland, California. His family moved to Miami, Florida in 1924, and he stayed in the South for a good bit of his early years. His grandfather, John Lincoln Brandt, was a Disciples of Christ minister. The Disciples was a movement that birthed the Protestant denomination, which is still very much a thing today. And it was also a splinter group of William Branham's cult, which, when Branham died, got even deeper into the divine healing preaching. Faith Assembly, the cult that I was raised in, was also an offshoot of Branham. According to John Collins of the William Branham Historical Research website, the core doctrine that David Berg started with was still the Branham doctrine, but Berg just made it even worse. So, it's interesting. I did not know that about this cult until I started writing these notes. But his mother, Virginia, was paralyzed in 1913. She had slipped on ice, or another report said she was in a car accident. But she had broken her back in two places and she was bedridden. Although that didn't prevent her from getting busy, because David was conceived while she was allegedly paralyzed. But one day
Gotta say it differently. You gotta be like busy.
busy. I thought I did.
No, you just shouted busy, but you didn't say it in a snazzy kind of way, like a Syndrome in The Incredibles, hey, got busy.
Didn't prevent her from getting busy. But in 1919, she stood up and walked for the rest of her days. Nice. She died in 1968.
That was proof that the cult worked, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's a miracle.
It was bullshit, which we'll get to. She died in 1968. She, her husband, and anybody else around saw this as a miracle, but was it? I mean, this spearheaded her faith healing ministry, but I have questions. Did it really happen, or was it just a made up story? Of course, it was just a made up story. But,
well, I don't know. I mean, some people that have paralysis can regain use after time.
No,
Eh,
it was a con. But
mm,
David grew up believing that his mother was chosen by God because she had been saved from being paralyzed. David would later tell this story in the cult when he instituted faith healing, or the Branham doctrine. David Berg was the youngest of three kids. His father was a Swedish man named Hjalmar, and his mother, Virginia Lee, were both Christian evangelists, and they were part of the disciples of Christ, but they were booted out because they spoke out in the church um, about Virginia's divine healing, which that was a no-no as far as the disciples were concerned. They just got into another movement and pressed on. This was the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Miami. His family was involved with many different churches over the next 14 years, and they literally lived on offerings as they went from church to church, which would cause them to raise David knowing all about being frugal, but put a knife in that.
all right, we already got a knife. All right.
Lots of knives in this one. Lots of knives. Long story. But his parents were constantly away, leaving the kids behind, which wasn't a good thing. David was frequently sexually molested by a babysitter named Maria at 3 years old. Put a knife in that. This went on for a while, causing odd behavior from David. And one day, his mother caught the sitter in the act and fired her, but put a knife in that too.
Oh boy. Okay, so we have knife and firing, knife and molestation, knife and frugality. Okay, okay. Mhm.
David was hypersexualized as a result of this, and he allegedly had an incestuous relationship with a cousin when he was 7. He was also a chronic masturbator as a preteen, and his mother caught him many times and physically punished him for it. And she even dragged him, with his pants down in front of the family, mocking at him. She would say, "Pants on the ground, pants on the ground. You be looking like a fool with your pants on the ground."
I don't know if that's what she said, but okay.
Or maybe she didn't do that, but I couldn't resist
uh,
though.
uh, I have no comment for that, Bill.
I wonder if
Don't
anybody
ever
even.
rap.
I wonder if anybody actually remembers that. Do you know what I was
Yes.
doing? Okay, the
Yes, of
American
course I
Idol
do.
thing from way back years and years and years ago.
Yes. I still say that to my students. when, when they're sagging, I'm like pants on the ground, looking like a fool with your pants on the ground. I would tell them that.
I
It's
couldn't
very much
resist.
alive. Can-
David believed that because he was so misunderstood, that meant that he was a chosen prophet for God, uh, one that had a sex addiction. He began to chase teenage girls. He thought that God made our bodies to love and to be loved. He began to start going against whatever doctrine he found himself in. He was just pushing back against it just because I'm David, so therefore I disagree. So after graduating high school in 1935, David was drafted into the Army. He faked double pneumonia and he was discharged from the Army for it. And after his discharge, he claimed that he was on death's door, but he was miraculously healed by God.
Hmm.
This got him into ministry, and he would tell this story as well as his mother's divine healing story to anybody who would listen. So he's got two stories that happened, within his family. So, that,
Seems legit.
yeah, well, to somebody that wants to believe that stuff, yeah. Oh, it happened to his family twice, so it's got to be true.
Hmm?
He was with the Christian Missionary Alliance, and they moved him out to Arizona in the late 1940s. But surprise, surprise, he was booted because he was going against their narrative too.
Hmm.
He said it was because he was advocating for racial diversity, and maybe that was the case, or maybe it wasn't. But there was also this pesky little allegation of sexual misconduct with a church employee. Yeah, he was 23 and she was 17.
Mm.
Do you want to say put a knife in that, or should I?
Go ahead and put a knife in that, I suppose.
But David blamed the church. But after that, David left religion. He went back to school on the GI Bill, studying philosophy and government, a government model that would heavily influence his belief when it came to his cult. And take a guess.
Mm.
Starts with an S.
His sexual deviancy? What?
Socialism. um,
Ah.
he hated he hated capitalism because it was fueled by greed. He thought that people should worship God, not wealth and possessions. So already the frugality of his upbringing is beginning, in steering him back into religion and his interpretation of religion. He also coined a new term, which was Christian socialist.
Okay.
But
I
he
mean,
was
it sounds nice on the surface, I suppose.
maybe, but
Huh.
he was also an anti-Semite, and he blamed the Jews for everything bad in the world. And I'm sure he really loved the early 1940s.
Eesh.
But it's funny because he said that he was kicked out of that last mission, that last church because he was preaching diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah, but he's an
Well,
anti-Semite,
okay, diversity for everybody except the Jews.
except for
Come
the
on
Jews.
now. Let's be real here. It's like the KKK preaches diversity for everybody who's white.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of people. Okay. It's white
No.
diversity. There's whites everywhere.
um.
Being real.
Uh.
Right.
Yeah. But he cited an anti-Semitic paper called "The Protocols of the Elders of Zion," and he was deeply anti. He was deeply anti-Semitic, but he swore that he wasn't. Kind of like when a white racist says, "I'm not racist, but." you
I have black friends. That's what you say, right? I know
Yeah,
some black people.
I know some black people. Yeah. I'm not racist, but I'm racist. Eventually, he decided that God had said California is the place you ought to be, so he loaded up the truck and he moved to Beverly.
Like a hillbilly.
I got to throw some light stuff into this one because this story is dark. So, hills, that is. But while there, he began drifting from church to church looking for one that matched his beliefs. And while at a church in LA, he met a woman named Jane Miller, and it was a match made in heaven, literally. They were made they were married within a week and they had 4 children. Linda in 1945.
In a week?
Huh?
I'm like, in a week? You said they were married in less than a week. They had 4 children. And I was like, wow,
Oh.
they were really.
Divine impregnation.
It was just the phrasing that made me chuckle.
This is a difficult episode to write. I've been working on it for a long time. But Linda in 1945, Paul in 1947, Jonathan in 1949. But their names would later be changed once the cult was established to Deborah, Aaron, and Hosea. Faith, or Faithy, was born in 1951, and her name wasn't changed because I guess it was godly enough.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, but Jane became Mother Eve.
Mother Eve.
Mother Eve sounds like a brand of a feminine hygiene product.
Yes. Well, Summer's Eve. Yes. Yeah. Mother's Eve for the older lady that's not feeling so fresh.
Oh God, I would digress, but this story's too long. It just reminded me of something really funny, a commercial that I heard recently. But he moved his family to Texas, where he got a job working at Fred Jordan's Texas Soul Clinic. Now, Fred was an early user of TV and radio, and he had a chain of soul clinics across the U.S. They were missionary training schools. They became friends, and Fred mentored David, and he taught David how to manipulate the scriptures in the Bible and make them relevant to the lives of the downtrodden people and make them join the movement,
Mm.
believing that God would take care of them in exchange for them pledging to the ministry and, of course, Jesus. So, right there, the seeds of the cult had been planted. If they hadn't already been planted, I mean, he may, I mean, that may have been his goal from day one, but it
He was planting
definitely,
lots of seed, right?
yeah, the liquid kind, ew. Um, but Fred eventually sent David to Miami to open a soul clinic there, and he was a rising star. David began speaking in tongues and teaching apocalyptic teachings. This came from the Pentecostal movement in the 50s, which birthed many religious fundamentalist cults, including Faith Assembly, the one I was raised in, like what I was talking about earlier. But the connection that that he was tied to William Branham was something that I discovered later, but added, you know, and added to it. I was like, how could I not?
Mm,
I haven't heard any podcast that mentioned anything about Branham in this cult.
mm.
So, but David began traveling to speak at various soul clinics, and he brought his family with him. David's deviancy was growing. He began molesting his daughter Deborah at 7 years old. Um, he told her that her mother wasn't fulfilling his needs and that God sanctioned his relations between him and Deborah. He
Oh.
began,
Mm,
yeah, he began believing that sex should be celebrated and that it was perfectly fine for anyone, even family members, um, especially parent-child relations.
mm.
Um,
Especially? Yikes.
yeah, I mean, there's literally a movie that there's several movies, a lot of movies that really illustrate why incest is not a good idea. Like
Well, the
Deliverance,
Habsburgs, the
the hills
Habsburgs
have eyes.
illustrated that that incest is not generally a good idea. I mean,
Yeah,
uh, we saw how this went with the Spanish kings.
yeah, but he didn't really act on this until later. So
What
what should we do?
should we do?
Put a knife in that.
Nothing. Put a knife in that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I told you there's a
okay.
lot of knives in this one. Deborah's abuse went on until she was 12. You know, when he then focused his attention on Faith, who was 6 years old. He was a pedophile, duh, and he interpreted his urges as a divine directive, and he got away with it.
Hmm.
But that sweet gig at the Soul Clinic didn't last much longer because David was raising hell about evolution being taught in schools, and Fred Jordan didn't like the negative attention that Berg was drawing to his outfit because of that, and he fired him. Yeah, I mean, Fred Jordan probably didn't believe in evolution, but
Why not?
you can't, you know, it's just like you don't, if you're doing something shady, you don't want to do something that's going to really shine the spotlight on you, you know.
No. Yeah. Well, I don't know if anyone ever accused these people of being smart. I mean,
Oh, he was very smart. I mean, really, and I'm not even being facetious. I mean, David Berg was a freaking genius, as a master manipulator, you know, master con artist. And you can't do that if you're stupid, you know. I mean, so
eh,
I'm, I hate to
you just got
give,
to find people stupider than you are. Let's
yeah.
be fair. Uh,
Um, but this bounced him back to square one, and he was a future cult leader with nobody to cult with. Poor guy. um, he also he also took this as Jordan being jealous of what he was becoming, and yeah, he probably wasn't wrong, to be honest.
mm,
You know, because he was a rising star. but he had a very charismatic way of communicating. He was able to command audiences and capture the attention of young people, specifically teenagers. And Jordan likely saw Berg as a threat and used the static from Berg's anti-evolutionist stance as an excuse to 86 him.
Hmm.
So Berg got a job as a bus driver and a substitute teacher immediately after, which is horrifying on its own.
Yikes. Let's see, who shouldn't be around children? That guy.
But he's on the down low at this point. But David Berg rebounded quickly, and this led this setback led him to a church service being taught none other by William Branham. Berg met Branham. Branham gave Berg a prophetic a blessing on Berg's ministry. He began to incorporate the Branham doctrine into his own, and for the rest of his life, Berg would say that William Branham was responsible for bringing thousands of souls to God. He once said, and I quote, "The Christianity system spends so much time." No, he didn't say the Christianity. He said the churchianity,
Okay.
churchianity.
Churchianity.
Yeah, when I was typing that, I had to look at it twice. I'm like, is that what it really says? Yeah, that's what it really said. Churchianity.
Church.
Uh, the churchianity system spends too much time and money on getting ready, on preparation, and that they never get the job done. One little hick evangelist like Tommy Hicks or William Branham had no education, and and they butchered the King's English. They could go out there and win hundreds of thousands of souls to the Lord, heal thousands, and accomplish more than these guys with all of their education and denominations with all of their church buildings, and it's pitiful. Branham was far from a little evangelist. um, Berg moved back to California and began speaking and building a new following, mostly teenagers and young adults. He was still sexually abusing his kids, and he was also sleeping with all the teens that he was attracting into his new movement. In Huntington Beach, California, he hooked up with the Light Club, which is a coffee house there. His mother, Virginia, had introduced him to the owner there. And that's where David formed Teens for Christ, with the coffee house as his home base. So he kind of just basically took over. It's like, this place is mine now. It was mostly
And the owners
hippies.
were just like, okay.
Well, he was attracting business. So I don't know how good the business was because it was mostly hippies. I mean, those guys are broke. But
Well, I
they
guess they could afford the coffee, They need
maybe
some coffee when they're coming down from their LSD and stuff like that, so give them a break.
too much LDS in the '60s.
Mhm.
Star Trek reference. But they'd play religious songs, religious folk songs on guitars late into the night, and they'd listen to David preach about the end times as well as everything that he thought was wrong with the U.S. He preached about Jesus' love, divine healing, and of course the imminent apocalypse. Now he was beginning to make sex with everybody, but you know only a right for the holy people like him. And he used passages from the Bible, from Song of Solomon, which is basically an erotic novella in itself. Um,
Oh, yes. I've read the Song of Solomon. Uh-huh. Mhm.
um, might be interesting to see like a adaptation of that in a mini series or something. It would be very controversial, but I bet if done right, it would be really good too.
Oh, yeah.
but um, but he also used King David taking Bathsheba for himself and Abraham. In their common bond, they all had multiple young wives. And of
Mhm.
course, you can't leave out Lot, who had threesomes with his own daughters. Of course,
Yeah,
of course, this was after he
that was
offered.
before his wife turned to salt, right?
No, after this was
Oh, mhm.
this was after he had offered them, his daughters to a group of sex savages in Sodom rather than turning his house
The
guests over to
angels.
them. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, they were virgins then, but he got freaky with them later on.
Take my two daughters. We don't want them. We want we want those sexy, sexy seraphim. So-
Yeah.
Ah,
of all the celebrated characters in the Bible, I think Lot was the biggest dick of all of them, honestly.
yeah. Oh, I don't know how many were actually that great of people when you truly think about the story. I mean,
Right.
like
But
like
so
Job. Yeah, maybe Job. Job was okay.
yeah.
I mean, he he had all of his children killed and everything, and you know, because God had a bet with Satan, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
but he still praised God, so he was
Job was a
righteous, I guess.
Job was a really good person. And like you said, yeah, that it's like people have tried to tell that story about Job, and they're like they're trying to like break it down and everything and draw it out and all that stuff and everything, but really what you just said is that God made a bet with the devil. That's it. And
Yeah, and destroyed the life of one of his loyal followers
right,
to prove a point to
to
the
prove a point. Yeah.
devil, which makes so much sense when we think about dogma and I, oh god, I can't even get into it. um,
Anyway, hashtag but I digress.
at least it was a Bible digression, right?
Yeah. So Berg used these things to justify him banging whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted, regardless of the girl's age. And it really didn't take Berg very long to win control over people's minds. Most of them were teenagers and people in their 20s, and a lot of them were homeless, but they thought that they had found a home there. But something happened that really drove the narrative about the U.S. being evil. The stories of the atrocities of the Vietnam War began hitting the news, and David capitalized on them, not to mention the Cold War was running strong. David convinced them that the apocalypse was upon them, and he knew exactly how to work these kids. But his mother, Virginia, died in 1968. And on the surface, he put on an act like he was in mourning, but deep down, he was glad she was gone because he was now free to do whatever he wanted to do with nobody to scold him about it.
He was
You know.
free to masturbate as much as he wanted.
Yeah, he had his pants on the ground a lot. um, he made Virginia and every old religious leader out to be the bad guys, and according to him, it was time for the young to make their mark. But he was old. He was born in like 1918. We're in 1968.
Yeah. There's lots of old people that, talk about how other old people are too old to.
Yeah.
I- uh, that's a theme, I think.
Uh, I always tell people that I'm never going to look at an old person as being old because I'm going to be that age at some point, and I don't want to grow old.
Yeah.
I've had that mindset since I was in my 20s.
Yep. And now you're old.
Nope, I'm not. Yes, I
Yeah,
am.
you are.
I'm young at heart, though.
No, that's immaturity.
Ouch! Damn. If you and I are still friends when you turn 50, I'm gonna be at your birthday party, and I'll bring you a walker and a cane for your birthday present.
Oh, you're gonna loan me yours?
That backfired.
So
Oh my
sweet.
god. Oh god. Oh man. Damn. That That was brutal. Respect your elders, damn it. Huh?
Age before beauty. It's okay.
He began telling these young people that they had to cut ties to their families. Their families were all sinners if they didn't convert to David's to David's doctrine. To David's, see, you messed me up. David's doctrine. Isolation, check. But before they cut ties, they were to go to their families and milk them for everything that they could, steal whatever valuables they could, and then sell the stuff. Then come back and give it all to David. I mean, the church. He told his followers to go out and preach his doctrine in public and be loud about it. And the religious people in California didn't appreciate this, and they began picketing the coffee house. He was giving the boot from the coffee house, and he took about 100 people with him, and they camped out in a park in Arizona, and this is when they adopted the name Children of God. David now had his cult squarely in the palm of his hand, and that's what he had wanted all along. David had told his followers that God had told him that an earthquake was going to just come and destroy California, and that's why they had to leave there. He said it would. He said I've got here that it was going to happen in 1989, and I don't think that that's right. That was when 1989 was when the apocalypse was going to happen. So the earthquake was going to happen sooner than that. But regardless,
Spoiler alert, it didn't happen.
right, well, but but this was 1968, so obviously California was not the place they ought to be. So they loaded up the bus and they moved to Arizona. But sure enough, later a severe earthquake hit and California sank into the ocean, proving that David Berg was definitely God's prophet.
Mhm.
No, it didn't.
Oh.
And it never did. Although whenever there was an earthquake in California, I'm sure he's like, "See, it's coming."
Yeah. I mean, I think that's typical for California because the fault and yeah.
My friend Matthew from Murder Coaster, they were recording an episode one time, and he lives in Northern California, the Humboldt area, and like they were right in the middle of recording, and all of a sudden, an earthquake happened, and you could see it on his camera. I mean, he's he jumped up and hauled ass out of his little out of his room and everything to go check on his kids and all that stuff, and you could clearly see the camera shaking. Yeah, and his co-host Krista was like, oh my god, I mean. They took it out of the episode, but they put the footage on Instagram and Facebook, and it was intense. I mean, it's just like us in Florida, we can't imagine a hurricane, but them in California, or we can't imagine an earthquake, but them in California, they can't imagine a hurricane.
I mean, I would like to be in a small earthquake just to know what it felt like. Just I don't know. I think it would be very weird to experience, but
Yeah, it would, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it if it never happens to me.
well, just like I want to see like a really big tornado, not coming at me or at
I
anybody's property, but just I've seen little and I've seen water spouts, but like I would like to see like a really good tornado from a distance that is just kind of going through an empty field, not hurting anybody.
I've had enough of tornadoes. I mean, I've been through 3 of them, like direct hits, and
hmm
they weren't like huge hurricanes. They weren't like huge tornadoes or anything like that, but it was bad enough. It's like if somebody from you know the Midwest comes to Florida and goes through a Category 1 hurricane, you're like, oh my God, that was bad enough. I'd hate to see what a stronger one is like. And I'm that way with the 3 tornadoes that I've been through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was bad enough. I don't want to see anything worse. Although I have seen a freaking water spout one time. Um, It was in the Indian River over in Brevard County, and it was going, and it hit. There's this man-made, you know, land that goes out to a causeway. So
Hmm.
it's deep right there next to the man-made part. So it's going over
Yeah.
there, and as soon as it hit the land, it just collapsed. It was
Hmm.
it was crazy. I was like, damn, you know, I wish somebody had gotten that on camera because that was intense. It just hit it,
Cool.
and I mean, it just hit it and just collapsed in on itself. And every car that was like there at the time got a free car wash with salt water, well, brackish water,
Yeah.
probably some fish and everything. I I was coming over the bridge when it happened, and I
Mm.
was just like, I saw it, and I was just like, holy crap! And I was about to stop, and then it just collapsed, and it was gone. It was so weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, California is alive and well. It didn't happen. The earthquake never happened, and not one person called him on his bullshit. But the truth was, is he was evicted from the park, probably because they weren't paying for their stay in the park and they were trashing the place.
Mm.
But while at the Arizona park, he had met a woman named Karen Zerby, and she became his top advisor in moving the cult forward. And that's what she thought anyway. And it later did become that, but at the time she was just a side piece, and his wife Jane accepted it, or Mother Eve, excuse me.
Mm.
When they left there, you know, when they were evicted, God had foreseen this move. That's what he told everybody. But
Well, yeah, God, they weren't where they were supposed to be. That's
right.
that's
But really, David had a friend in Virginia with land who had said that they could come and stay there. Free living space, and his followers were now, most of them were all the way across the country from their families in most cases. But he didn't let their time in Arizona go to waste. I mean, he preached that his time in Arizona was akin to Moses on the mountain receiving the Ten Commandments.
yeah. Mhm. I don't know. Did he get that 11th commandment, thou shalt not have sex with children? I mean, I mean,
It might have been on the third tablet that Moses dropped.
got it.
15 commandments, clash. 10 commandments.
And he gave me these 10 commandments.
I love that movie. I need to watch that movie. Did you know that he actually did make a History of the World Part 2? It was
Oh,
a TV
really?
it was a TV series. It came out a couple years ago. I mean, and surprisingly, it was very good. I mean, there was a couple scenes, there was a couple segments that were kind of yeah, but overall, it was really good. I mean, I think it's on
Nice.
Netflix or something, but it's worth a watch. But once they got to Virginia, it's not lost on me that his mother was also named Virginia. Um, just a weird coincidence, but he gathered everybody into a barn on the property, which that sounds familiar. And he preached for a day straight, and I'm sure he was coked up, um, just coked up to go for that long. But he preached that God had given him the strength to do it. Why? Witnesses said that his body began shaking and tears were streaming from his eyes, and the more and more, the longer that David went. I mean, his blood pressure was probably through the fucking roof because of all the coke that he was on. Too bad he didn't do too much.
Mm.
This sermon was the most intense end time sermon to date, and he sold it, like an effective. I was gonna say politician, but I'll just say cult leader.
Yeah.
If it looks like a duck. But it worked, and his followers were more afraid than they had ever been about the end times. So mission accomplished. This was also when the name changes were handed out. Like I mentioned before, Karen Zerby, she was um, renamed Maria, and she became Mother Maria. And he's not very original with his names as far as the you know women that he you know his his bottom bitches.
Mary, Maria, Eve, Mary, Maria, Eve,
Yeah, but David had also taken on the first of his many names,
Magdalene.
Magdalene. How could One thing about West Side Story that I never got was how in the hell did the guy run through Spanish Harlem yelling Maria and only one girl came to the window? Not even a snick. No, you're for those of you listening on audio, she is silently snickering. She's trying her damnedest not to laugh.
Jesus Christa.
But Maria spoke in tongues, and he would bring her up to do it, and he would say whatever he wanted to say while saying that he could interpret God's message, that God was speaking through her, and she was interpreting it. So basically, she's just going, "Oh, so what?" And then he would say that as God says that you should give me all your money and submit to my every sexual desire. This happened all day long in that long sermon in the barn, and a few people were scared of David, including Jane, the real wife. But everybody else was convinced that David was the prophet of God. His final message on the day of that on the day of the day long coke binge, I mean sermon, was that the children of God had to expand ASAP, and that meant going out, not just going out into the U.S., but to the world. And their message was going to be God's revelation to David. Marching orders. Marching orders to build an army of the pure to help Jesus out when he returned to carry, when he returned to earth to build his kingdom on earth. It's freaking cult leaders, man. I mean, I don't know. But he dissolved his marriage to Jane because she was of the old church, and Maria represented the new church. But Jane stayed with Children of God to stay with her kids, but she was treated like a second class citizen, out with the old and with the new. Obviously, Maria was much younger. When David took the name Moses David, that was pivotal. And this cemented him as the prophet. And I have a clip of him explaining it after the fact, and I'm going to roll it right now.
I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull!"
No.
Doug has a picture of a Skeletor, like different pictures of Skeletor saying like "Live, Laugh, Love,"
Mhm.
but it's all Skeletor. Like,
I love the pervy Skeletor memes. Those are
oh yeah,
freaking
oh yeah.
hilarious. but but I'm not far off though. I mean, he had convinced everybody that he had a direct link to God and that God spoke through him. His followers quickly looked to him as the God figure rather than God himself, and there's no way that this ends well.
Mm.
By this time, he had a hierarchy established, and we'll get to the details of that later. But this was when he decided that all of his inner circle could have sex with everybody um, in the inner circle, and with whoever else they wanted. They could go out and do, just grab somebody, in
Nice.
the lower echelon, but it was only the inner circle that was able to do that at this point. But sex is love. God is love. God wants everybody to love each other, so He wants everybody to have sex with everybody, regardless of their age. But like I said, at this point, the inner circle were the only ones that were allowed to, use that. But it wouldn't last long. Um, Berg began sending people out to other spots to set up satellite locations, and this was to grow the cult for him to have more money coming in from all over the U.S. and then the world. But in the 70s, as more and more cults burst into the public's knowledge, people began pushing back. Berg had trained the heads of these satellite locations on how to brainwash people, although that's not what he called it, obviously. Children of God was getting noticed, and not in a good way. Well, not in a good way if you're David Berg. For the rest of us, this was a good thing. um,
For anybody thinking of membership, this is a very good thing.
yeah. One group gained notoriety that was anti-Children of God. It was called Free Cog, Children of God, COG. But it was made up of concerned friends and family members of the cult members who were by now, um, they were all over the U.S. They lawyered up and started coming after the cult. And this caused David, Eve, Maria, and a handful of the carefully selected loyalists to flee to Canada. But he was still very much
Hey,
pulling the strings, and by this time, Maria was almost as powerful as David. Um, Also, have you heard of that guy, the cult deprogrammer guy who would kidnap cultists and basically deprogram them? I can't remember what his
n-
name was, and I meant to put that in there, but I forgot. Um,
no, but it sounds interesting.
yeah, there's a documentary about it on Netflix, but but he grabbed several members of Children of God, among other cults, um, and it's an interesting story. That that might be worth doing an episode on its own, to be honest with you. um, but now children were being born into the cult. David believed that children were the future, although he did not teach them well or let them lead the way.
He certainly
Education.
slept with them, though. Um,
Education was also forbidden because the world was coming to an end. What do you need education for? All
you
these
don't need
kids,
education. Just lay down.
yeah, just lay down,
Ah,
just lay down and call me father.
ugh.
That was a simultaneous gag. All these kids born into it knew, all they knew was the cult doctrine, and that they would be the soldiers in God's army. They also knew that they they were play toys for pretty much anyone. That would come later, but we're not off from it. By now, Berg was doubling down on his apocalyptic message, and the cultists were living in fear of the end times, which were right around the corner, and you can only imagine what was going through this kid's mind. Being raised in this madness, thinking that the entire world wanting to kill them, and that the only person who could protect them was Father David Moses or whatever the hell name he was going by. I
Daddy,
think, huh?
Daddy.
Diddy. I think this puke changed his name more than Diddy did. Although I do think that Diddy and David would have gotten along well. Sidebar: Do you know who Craig Mack is?
Mm-mm.
He was a rapper. He was Diddy's first star, first mega star on his Bad Boy record label.
Hmm.
Um, but he wound up joining R.G. Stare in his cult, and wound up dying of preventable illnesses, preventable causes. He had some sort of heart failure, which could have been prevented if he had gotten, um, medical attention.
Eh,
Yeah. Um, it's too bad David Berg didn't get a hold of Diddy. I mean, but we covered R.G. Stare and his cult on Overcomer's Ministry really early on in episode 16. It was a very interesting case, and the Craig Mack aspect of it just made it even more compelling. It's just like, holy crap, this guy. This guy was a star and everything, and for him to, I mean, if somebody like that can be swayed into a cult, like you know, Overcomer's ministry was very similar to Children of God as far as the
Mhm.
commune aspect of it, the working, the sex, and all that stuff. It was very similar. But it was just one isolated um, commune. But if a star like that can get absorbed, anybody can if they're not careful.
Yeah.
In 1970, Berg came back to the U.S. and he moved the Virginia chapter to Texas. His old pal Fred Jordan had let him move onto his old compound, which was the old, the now abandoned Soul Clinic Ranch. This became Children of God's home base, and from there, even more satellite locations in the U.S. were set up. But there, Berg outlined how his followers were to live their lives. Up at 6:30 a.m., breakfast. Out to work their assignments by 7:30. Unpaid slave labor, building things, gardening, cooking, watching the kids, or whatever they were sent to do. 11:30 to noon was lunchtime, and then more work for 6 hours. And then after that, it was Bible study well into the night. Well, after midnight. Next morning, rinse and repeat. Lots of times they'd get less than 4 hours of sleep every night, and this was 7 days a week
Yes.
for every single satellite location. But do you think Berg or his leaders kept that schedule?
Of course not.
Of course
Or
not.
actually, no, I think they did. Oh, they did totally.
Well, they're doing other things, and by other things, I mean people.
Sorry, my schedule is sex, 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 lunch, sex, sex.
I don't understand how these old freaking cult leaders have the freaking stamina to do it that freaking much.
Well, I don't know. If you get a lot of young people, maybe they're the ones that are
Maybe.
doing a lot of the work.
Could be.
Ew.
Ew. The hierarchy goes like this: David Berg's top dog, the prophet. Next, Mother Maria, the second in command, um, and also a prophet. Next was the royal family, which were all of David's sons, all of David's kids, and last in the order was Jane, David's first and still legal wife. um, Similar chains of command were at every satellite location, but they all got their marching orders from David. In 1971, they effectively patched over another cult. um, Patched over is when one motorcycle club absorbs another one,
Hmm.
and but this one was called the Jesus People Army.
It sounds like a band.
Jesus
Jesus
People
People
Army.
Army.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen that YouTube video of this church, this teen service for church and everything? You've got this guy up there. He tells everybody to take off their shoes and wave their socks around. I'm sure that place smelled wonderful. But he's up there. You spin me right round, Jesus, right round like a record, Jesus. I'm not even lying. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh God, it is
And
so.
now I'm at the yikes.
It is so bad. It is so bad. But yeah, that sound Jesus People Army. That's kind of what I picture when I think of Jesus People Army. That sounds like one of these crazy, like super Walmart church youth group events. You know.
Yeah.
But they were a legit cult known nationwide. They just had a bad name. But they were in Canada as well. But their home base was Fred Jordan's ranch. But once again, that wouldn't last very long. And in 1972, Jordan evicted them again. But by now, Berg had around 2,000 people under his rule alone, and was still growing. People across the U. By this time, he's already overseas because he left the U.S. for the last time in 1971.
Hmm.
But people across the U.S. were getting tired of their bullshit. David preached that the people who were up against them were all fascists and thought police. And it's not surprising that 1984 comes up here. This isn't the first cult that we've covered where the leader took inspiration from that book, and not in the way that the book was intended to mean. I've read that book; it's freaking intense. But I can also see how somebody would would take the fascist aspect of it and use it as like a
guidebook.
instruction manual. That's not the word I'm looking for, but we'll go with that. Okay, I was wrong. He left in 1972, not 71. My bad. But in 72, Berg left the U.S. and went into hiding. But he would still send out what he called Mo letters, short for Moses letters, because he was going by Moses at the time. And this was what all the other groups preached off of, and it was the gospel, and in many cases deemed more important than the Bible itself, although the only approved reading material aside from Berg's writings was the King James Bible.
I was going to say, was the Kama Sutra.
He wouldn't even let his followers read 1984. This is also where the more draconian rules came into place. For example, birth control was outlawed. You never take a full-time job. He dictated that people lived based on where he wanted. He dictated where
Dictated.
He dictated.
He dictated. He dictated.
He dictated. No, he dictated where people lived based on where he wanted to recruit from. And he began arranging marriages, but that would later change. I've pieced this together from a bunch of different sources, and I'm trying my best to keep the timeline straight because it's hard. Also, in 1972, Berg was in a chapter in Oklahoma, and that was when he took off to England. The heat was getting turned up by the free cog people and law enforcement. His paranoia, whether justified or not, was getting to him, and he fled, and he would never return to the U.S. But that didn't mean that he would stop running the cult. He invited anybody who could to join him overseas and spread the word. I mean, the apocalypse is coming. I mean, it was his duty to save as many people as he could. He began sending missionaries all over the world, to establish followings wherever on the planet that he could. And his message resonated with the young, the impressionable, and of course the sexy.
Yes.
And keep in mind, this puke has been hypersexualized since childhood, and he was already engaging in orgies with the inner circles of whatever locations that he visited, but the worst is yet to come. By 1974, Berg had been very successful in gaining followers in Europe. Like Father Yod and the family cult, episode 100, Berg was always into music. There was a folk band at a French satellite had put together that actually got a number one song on the charts in France.
Nice.
But he was homesick, and this turned him into a full-blown drunk. If he was awake, he was drunk. And this obviously made for some really strange Mo letters. And for the rest of his life, the cult was run by his drunken ramblings, and he would constantly change the rules, and his followers all followed it blindly.
Nice.
His inner circle was also showing signs of wear. By now, his oldest daughter, Deborah, was married with children, and she had moved her families overseas with David. David was bouncing around, and that was causing tension in her marriage to her husband. She was worried that he might try to diddle her kids like he did to her. And she also learned the truth that Virginia's story of divine healing was bullshit. The whole time that she was supposedly bedridden, there were photos of her up and about. that she
Oh.
found. So later in 1974, the full scope of David's perversion came out into full view and would have horrified everybody not brainwashed by this perverted chucklehead. But to the brainwash, it was the law and it was irrefutable. He had gone in secret to an island in the Canary Islands called um, Tenerife, or something like Tenerife. I don't know.
Wow.
I didn't put down the actual spelling. I spelled it the way that I thought it was pronounced. So, um, but this was where he would test run his master plan, which was likely his plan all along. Staggering drunk and filthy rich off the money that was being sent to him from all the satellites, he brought a flock of people with him to the island, which was mostly women, but some men, and of course, kids.
Mm-hmm.
Most Mo letters were sent for immediate release, but this one wasn't. It was sent to the leaders of the satellite locations with orders to read it, but to keep it on the down low, but be ready to implement it. And it was called the Law of Love. In a nutshell, pun intended, it said that all members of Children of God could have sex with everyone. The cult was more than 50% men, so basically it was the law that every woman had to submit to any and every sexual advance from a man, basically legalizing rape. And
Great.
it was required of men to accept the advances of a woman too, but still, you get the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've,
a
most
man
men are
is less
not.
likely to try to turn away the advances of a woman than a woman, than the other way around.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said earlier, God is love, sex is an expression of love. Therefore, any advance is an expression of love because God wanted his followers to love everybody. And he basically redefined God's love and equated it to sex and made it a sin to refuse sex with anybody. And remember, he had already outlawed birth control.
Mm-hmm.
He also
Well, that's
dissolved.
just more little children for
Yeah,
his cult.
exactly. He also dissolved all marriages. Yeah, with all the sex happening, what was the point of being married? But we're probably going to get to this point at sometime soon. But still, um, the children, children were community property, so they don't need a defined set of parents. But before, masturbation was a sin and forbidden, as was sex in general, unless you were in the inner circle. Now, masturbation was encouraged. Berg preached that when a woman masturbated, she was supposed to imagine that she was making love to Jesus. Ew. But whatever. I mean, but it was different for the men masturbating. They had to imagine themselves as a woman being made love to by Jesus. Why? Because despite all the forced sex, homosexual sex was a sin.
Oh yeah. Unless it's Jesus.
That's why he made the men imagine that they were women being plowed by Jesus. There's this podcast.
Why didn't they imagine they were Jesus plowing women? I mean,
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Seriously. There's this podcast called "The Cult Next Door," and it's the children of this, a cult leader. It wasn't like this one. It was more like the one that I was raised in, but but they basically all left. I mean, mass exodus the cult, and they started a podcast. The children of this guy, and in the intro to the show, their podcast, they've got a clip of their dad saying something along the lines of like, God told me what it's like to be a new bride. He's like, I'm going to be really, descriptive here, but I don't care. He's like, if you can take it, he's like, if Yeah, if you go beyond the veil, that's the wedding chamber. God told me that. So basically, God wants to have sex with everybody.
Yeah.
I mean,
God's like, yeah.
it's just like every time I listen to that, I cringe whenever I hear that. I was just like, oh my. Ugh. Oh, and another thing is that we are coming for Jesus, and
Oh, we're all coming for Jesus.
he didn't mean advancing. God, it was so cringe. I mean, oh man, oh. Ugh.
I mean, we often do shout out his name when we're coming, so let's be honest.
Oh my God, you broke me. Oh man. People, wonder why true crime comedy is a thing. It's because how can you if I told these stories without levity, I would probably have killed myself by now, you know?
Can't be so depressing that we can't be so depressing that Anish Kapoor is like, hey, I need to patent that because it's so damn dark. You know?
Yeah. I mean, we don't make fun of the victims, we make fun of the bad guys. So but now we're to flirty fishing. I'm sure you're wondering when that was going to come up.
Mm.
But Berg decided that the women would have to go out and seduce men, preferably men of influence with wealth, but anybody would do. Sleep with them and entice them to join Children of God. This started with David and Maria going to clubs together. And David made Maria dress slutty and go out on the dance floor and entice men. And she would take these men to a hotel or their apartment or wherever, and she would have sex with them. Afterwards, she would tell them about the cult and how God's love equals sex with everybody. And of course, men being men, lots of them came, pun intended, on board and joined the cult for a little while. But we'll get to that. So Berg introduced flirty fishing and used Maria as an example. She was the first. And since it was good enough for Maria, the second in command, many other women fell in line participating as well. Men were the fish. The women were the fishers. Now, I know a lot about the Bible, and if memory serves, it was Jesus' disciples who were the fishers of men. And they were all men, and it had nothing to do with sex. Just saying. Just
And there
saying.
were some loaves involved too, right? No.
But oh no, I kind of find that term "fishers of men" a little cringe too. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, not. I understand the connotation of what that means. It just sounds weird. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But since birth control was a sin, lots of babies were born as a result. STDs happened as well, but Berg dismissed that with faith healing and it didn't really matter since the apocalypse was imminent. 1989 was coming, and everybody believed it. And what did the cult refer to these babies as? Take a guess.
Children of God. No.
Not a bad guess, but no.
Oh. Oh
Jesus
goodness.
babies.
Yeah.
Maria was also the first to get pregnant and give birth. Her son, Ricky Rodriguez, was born January 7th, 1975, during the time that this was during the time that they were on the island. David adopted him as his own, and he became the prince of Children of God. He plays a key part later, so I won't say put a knife in that, and you'll see why later. But Berg's name for him was Davidito. Just basically the word David with ITO attached to it. Not really sure what he was going for They're
Little David.
yeah, I don't know, but all the upper brass had decided that Ricky was a chosen son of children of God, and he would be the one to lead the chosen through the tribulation and to God. I thought the apocalypse was coming in 1989.
Supposed
You
to.
know, is Berg moving the doomsday like he does the goalposts and everything else that he makes law?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. People were starting to notice that the end times hadn't even started yet. But all these cults come up with excuses for when they set a date for something with a prophecy and it doesn't happen. They always find a way to justify their error. And um, we could probably do a mini episode just on all these excuses that these cult leaders come up with.
Oh, I'm sure.
After Ricky was born, all the women fell in line, and flirty fishing became the norm in Children of God. This is at every location across the world. I mean, Berg was now a pimp, and he had hundreds, if not thousands, of prostitutes working for him. And it wouldn't take long before that's exactly what it turned into. Berg had, Berg got the idea that he could make money off of this, so he had them charge for their salvation. That was lucrative too, and it's estimated that millions of dollars came into Church of God thanks to the exploitation of all the women in the cult.
Mm.
Gross. And of course, he came up with a way of justifying all of the sex too. He said that God loves sex and the devil hates it and tries to ruin it with evil like porn. But not forced prostitution?
Mm.
I guess I guess that's godly, but porn is evil. Forced prostitution, godly. Makes sense to me, I guess.
Having sex with children, godly, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was happening, but it wasn't. It didn't become the mandate yet. We're almost there though. But the older members of the cult weren't on board with flirty fishing, and by 1978, a pushback against Berg had begun. But David doubled down. He rewrote the rules again, but this resulted in over 300 people leaving the cult. But their numbers worldwide were well over 2,000. That's 300 people. Sex and free love became the entire focus of his charter. As more and more babies were born, Berg became like a grandpa to all of them. And basically, this new approach was grooming kids for what was coming next. He began sending out Mo letters explaining how sexualized he was as a kid and how he felt shame for it. And he shouldn't have felt shame for it at all. He should have enjoyed it because God wanted everybody to enjoy sex, even children. His youngest
Ugh.
daughter, Faith, even joined in telling cultists how much she loved her relations with David when she was a child. And it was God's way after all. No, come on, no. Oh, Faith gets even worse later.
Oh my
We're
gosh,
not
how much later, Bill?
we're not that far. We're not that far. Um, 30 pages to go. I'm kidding.
Bill, my friend is here. Come on.
um,
Mm.
David also freely discussed how he had molested all of his daughters, and since all of the children were community property, they were all up for grabs. He justified this by saying that it wasn't uncommon back in the days of Jesus for children to be married and bearing children. It's true, but the life expectancy was also a lot younger, a lot
Yeah.
shorter back then. And, kids had to grow up a lot faster. So, I mean,
Yep.
is it wrong? Probably, but that's just how it was. um, but before the followers began to do as they were instructed. Before too long, it wasn't uncommon for people to walk around nude and for people to be having sex right out in the open. And starting at age 12, the kids would be put on sharing schedules for anybody who wanted them. But before the age of 12, the kids were shown the ropes by being instructed to have sex with each other. And of course, you know,
Mm.
it was just the 12 thing was just on paper, but it was still going on with much younger kids too, with
No,
adults.
I'm sure it was.
But this is just on paper, But David had requested sex videos from the followers, and he would get them frequently. In the 80s, he started asking for videos of the kids with each other and with adults. So now he's doing child porn.
Porn
But
bad.
porn is evil. Yeah, porn is of the devil. But the way he justified that was by saying that porn, that this wasn't porn. This was this was them expressing God's love.
Porn.
Like Maria being the firstborn through flirtyfishing, Ricky got it more than most of the kids. I mean, people couldn't help themselves. They all wanted to love the prince. And I couldn't find anything, but I'm pretty sure by this time it had been okay for a man to have sex with a boy. I'm sure that became okay. But I couldn't find anything that said that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it wouldn't, at this point, because of the level of depravity, I would bet $1 that happened, that homosexuality was no longer a sin. I would.
Eh.
But when Ricky was a baby, David and Maria began putting together a growing scrapbook showing Ricky as he grew up. David insisted that the babysitters molest him to the point that by the time he was 3 years old, he would basically walk up to adults wanting it, because he thought that was how. And I can remember when Ashton Kutcher, he got, somehow was on this panel about, sex with, he had interviewed sex with kids and everything, and it's just like the kids were like trying to, play with him, and he said that it broke his heart, and because that they thought that it was right, they thought that it was playing, so it's just that's what that reminded me of, but David used this as proof that children liked sex. David also sent out copies of this book to chapters all over the world. But later, as David became an international fugitive, he ordered all copies to be destroyed. Although it's likely that some still exist, like in the hands of, say, the FBI or Interpol, for example. But because the FBI and Interpol were both after him. Surprised Interpol didn't get him. But in the 80s, the cult had over 8,000 people by this time. David realized that while flirty fishing was a good source of income, they needed more. And he sent missionaries out to preach and asked for donations, and it worked because their income did increase significantly. And not to mention there were lots of bands within the cult, worldwide, and some of their recordings became hits. In fact, there was one group called the Family Singers that even performed at the White House when George H.W. Bush was president. But these artists were separate organizations, and nobody realized that they were part of the cult. So, I mean, the White House gets a pass there. They didn't know. But during the late 80s, Children of God outlawed the sex practice on paper, similar to how the Mormons banned polygamy, but the Mormons meant it.
Yeah.
But it didn't go away. It was just being done on the down low. So many kids were born into the cult. They had, a lot of them had no idea who their father is, and some probably don't even know who their mother is. Lots of them were put into teen camps, to supposedly try to wean them off of their sexual deviance, but that's all they knew. So all that happened there was more sexual abuse and hard labor. Basically troubled teen industry camps. And these camps were set up in third world countries, obviously, to avoid scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
Faith Berg. Remember I told you she was going to get even worse.
Yeah.
She ran one of these camps with an iron fist, like a freaking tyrant. In the late 80s, David's health began to deteriorate. Maria more or less took over doing the Mo letters herself. STDs were also prevalent throughout the cult. Lots of people were coming down with AIDS, among other things, but AIDS isn't curable, but pretty much every other STD is, but you have to go to a doctor, which was still a sin. Now, David and Maria had made a rule saying that only people who had been in the cult less than 6 months could share, which doesn't make sense. That's not going to prevent anything. you know, all it takes is
You'll
one
get it in
person.
6 months.
Yeah, all it takes is for one person to join the cult that already has AIDS, and then boom, everybody's got AIDS. Everyone has AIDS. AIDS,
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 AIDS.
AIDS.
AIDS, 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 AIDS. I love that movie.
Grandma and your dog go blue. The Pope has got it, and so do you. Come on, everybody, we got quilting to do. Yeah, we're gonna break down these barricades. Everyone has AIDS, 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 AIDS,
AIDS, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS,
AIDS.
AIDS. I love that movie. That is one of the funniest movies of all time.
That movie is good.
Yeah. I wish they'd do a sequel, but I understand why they don't, because they've said that it was so much of a pain in the ass to put that movie together with all the detail, that they did, and
Oh yeah,
that's probably the best marionette movie ever made, as far as like the way everything looks and all that stuff. Anyway, hashtag but I digress. But it was relevant. But but later they decided that free love probably wasn't the best idea after all. Oh, Maria decided that. David hated it. But Maria also ruled the contact with. She ruled that contact with children was strictly forbidden, and there were zero tolerance. You would get punished for doing that now. So she also ended flirty fishing, and in reality, all it got was people who wanted to get laid. Very few of the men actually joined the cult and stayed for longer than a month or two. It's kind of like when Boone Helm went to Salt Lake City thinking that that the multiple wives were meant that they would just throw down with anybody. That was a good episode. But 1989 came and went without incident. No apocalypse, and people started to leave. And by the early 90s, lots of children were being removed from the communes by law enforcement. In Argentina, for example, over 300 kids were removed and over 30 parents were arrested. This was the most from one place specifically, but there were lots of other raids in the U.S., Australia, Spain, Canada, Germany, etc., wherever. 1994, David Berg died in Portugal without even ever once being arrested for anything. Maria and the new second in command, Peter Alexander, were in charge 100% now, and they began rebranding. They were inviting reporters in to look around and show that nothing nefarious was going on. The cult was now being run like a corporation. Children of God even became the Family International around that time too. Currently, they have a strong online presence, and their YouTube page makes videos for children that generate lots of money. Do what you will with that.
Oh,
Ricky Rodriguez was lost, and he began speaking out against Children of God / the Family International, which pissed Maria off. Maria had a daughter from somebody, and she refused to let Ricky see her, and this obviously hurt Ricky. Last time he saw Maria was in 2001. He was lost. He had no education. He had serious religious trauma, and he also had rage, all of which I can understand. In 2003, Ricky heard that Maria was going to be in Tucson, Arizona to see her parents. He wanted to take his sister away from Maria and raise her himself, free, away from all the cult madness. So he moved to Tucson, hoping to catch her the next time that she came around, but she never did. He found out that one of his demented babysitters was coming to Tucson. He invited her to dinner to catch up, and after dinner, they went back to his apartment, where the woman was probably thinking that they were going to have some reunion sex. But as soon as she sat down, Ricky attacked her and stabbed her to death.
Yes.
He then drove across the border into Mexico, and he called his fiance, and he explained what he had done and why he had done it, and then he shot himself. I wouldn't be surprised if something like this has happened to a lot more kids who are born into that cult. I know personally how hard it can be to assimilate into the real world after leaving a cult, and I didn't go through anything nearly this bad. But for context, according to s-xually.com, Joaquin Phoenix was a child in Children of God. So was his brother River, who said that he had been raped repeatedly starting at 4 years old. Joaquin later said that River had been joking about that, but he also said that when flirty fishing became the law, his parents got them out of there in 1977. River Phoenix died of a drug overdose, and you gotta wonder if Joaquin was joking or not. Or you got to wonder if River was joking or not. Yeah,
probably not.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And his overdose, his drug use, was probably a result of all the trauma that he had gone through.
Yeah.
Rose McGowan was born into an Italian Children of God commune. In an interview with People magazine, she said that her father had 2 wives within the cult, and that she remembers seeing people having sex all the time. She also knew kids who were raped, although her dad protected her from being molested. But when sex with kids became okay, they bolted. So, but the Family International is alive and well online if you want to join. I'm almost, I've thought about possibly, like contacting them, and pretending like I'm interested just to see what is actually going on, doing like an investigative report about it. I've thought about it, but I don't know if I can handle it, to be honest with you. I mean, if it's still anything resembling a cult, then that might not be good for my mental health.
Probably not.
But final thoughts?
Yikes.
Your first cult episode.
Yes.
Was it everything you hoped for?
Oh, yes, all of it.
Oh man,
Eek.
that. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we had covered a cult. I mean, you've been on you've been on here for what, like 6 months now, and this is the first
Something
one.
like that. Yep.
Yeah, and this is the first one that we've done since you've been on the show.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I did an interview with a cult survivor recently on a features episode, but other than that, that's this is it. That's it.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to bring in Sandra's husband, Doug, to do his Beer of the Week segment. How's it going, Doug?
Going all right, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm good. So, what do you have for us this week after this twisted, freaking crazy-ass story?
Yeah, so I did not have anything from California, unfortunately, but I do have this, and I don't know if it's pertinent or not, but so this beer that I have today is called Cave of Dreams. All right, this is a Marzen Fest beer. Mostly usually around like Oktoberfest. I know it's a little late for that, but I've had this before. It's really good. This is from War Pigs Brewing out of Munster, Indiana. War Pigs. They some neat artwork on the back of the can here too.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, but Cave of Dreams, from War Pigs Brewing, and again out of Munster, Indiana. They were at one point a collab with Three Floyds out of Munster as well. I think I've done one or two Three Floyds on the channel before. They were a collab with them, but now they are independent. They are their own brewery, brewed separately from Three Floyds and such. But yeah, Cave of Dreams. This is a Marzen Fest beer, so it's going to be a little lighter than what I normally have on the show. Let me go ahead and crack it open here and give her a pour and see what she looks like. So bring it up here. Let's see.
Orange.
Very orange.
Orange, amberish in this light, but yeah, nice head on it. Yeah, it looks really good. Very, very amber in color. Oh yeah, hint of hazelnut on this as well. So this beer, this is 6.1% ABV, so it's a little on the high end, not too high, but 6.1%. A 89 score on BeerAdvocate.com. So in the 80s and 90s, which those are the beers I normally go after, the higher ranking ones. But yeah, let's give her a taste. Yeah, definitely some German malt in there as well, being a fest beer. Definitely have that hazelnut coming through as well. A little on the sweeter side too. A little on the sweet side. I'm not sure exactly what malt they used with this, but maybe the hazelnut portion or something. But it is very sweet, very medium bodied. But yeah.
Oh no, I could use a little bit of the hair of the dog today. I got a little. I indulged a little too much last night.
But yeah, this is a solid beer. Like I said, I've had it before. Cave of Dreams from War Pigs Brewing, their Marzen Fest beer. But yeah. Yeah, definitely on the sweet side. It's a sweeter Marzen that I've had in the past, but really good. So, yeah, if you can find this, or if you're in the Indiana area, stop by War Pigs or Three Floyds. I think they're sold out of the same spot in Munster. So, but cheers.
It's funny you mentioned Indiana because, like, about an hour ago, I was in a discussion on Facebook about the worst roads in the country by far, and that would have to be Indiana, definitely. I think he agrees.
I've driven from the bottom of Indiana all the way to the top multiple times, back and forth. So
that it was really funny because the caption, the picture that people were commenting on was a picture of the brickyard, the racetrack. They said this is the longest stretch in Indiana that doesn't have a pothole.
Wow.
And it's not wrong. It's definitely not wrong.
Yeah.
So,
anyway.
Yeah. So
for sure,
the
roads are being done and redone over and over again. It's like they start construction on one end and then they just kind of move down the road. But that's here too.
Not in Indiana.
I-275 is always constructed. My whole family's in Indiana. You can kiss me.
So one more last thing with this beer, and then we'll wrap up. They have a nice little slogan or saying or whatnot right at the bottom right here. It says, "Do not wrestle with dreams. Step into the shadows without fear. If one does not seek, one does not find."
Interesting to be printed on a beer.
Yeah, so breweries are starting to do their own little thing now with like little phrases or catchphrases, sayings, and whatnot on their beer to further explain the name of it. Cave of Dreams and whatnot. So, but yeah, pretty interesting. But yeah, Cave of Dreams out of War Pigs Brewing from Munster, Indiana, and as always. If you want me to review a beer or see if I can find it, ckcbeer@gmail.com. Hit me up. Or work with me to send me some beer. Happy to just send me an email and we'll work together. Send me some and I'll review it for you. But ckcbeer@gmail.com.
I had another thought too, Doug. Rather than shipping you beer, if somebody like really wants to send you to review their like favorite beer or whatever, maybe get you a gift card from whatever brewery it is, so that you can use it, and then have the brewery itself ship it to you.
Oh yeah, that would work as well.
I had that thought a couple days ago. I'm like, yeah, it might be a little, it would be really expensive for the average Joe to ship, like a 6-pack or a 12-pack of beer. So that might be a much better option to do.
Yeah, I'm willing to work with people. Just hit me up, send me the email, and whatever works best or easiest, we'll make it happen.
Yeah. So, and like I said last week, first person to request a beer is going to get some stickers and a mouse pad. First person to actually send Doug something is going to get the stickers, the mouse pad, and a T-shirt. And we'll make it an exclusive T-shirt having something to do with the beer of the week. So.
Sounds good.
So, anyway, always nice having you on, and have a good one.
Yep, sounds good. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We appreciate the hell out of it. Please subscribe and follow on the YouTube page and comment, or follow us on whatever streaming platform you use, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or whatever. Please be sure to leave a 5-star rating. It really helps the show grow. But what helps the most is word of mouth. So, want to say it with me? If you like us, tell a friend.
Tell a friend. If you
hate us,
tell a foe.
Enemy or foe.
Enemy.
And until next week, later.
Cheers.
Bye.